One broken piano, one overlooked woman, and one performance that silenced the entire room. The hallways of the Boston Conservatory always smelled of lemon wax, varnish, and a silence that only music could break. Long before the students arrived with their pressed uniforms and polished confidence, Evelyn Hart was already there. Always there. She moved through the corridors with quiet purpose, pushing her cleaning cart like a ritual, her soft-soled shoes barely making a sound against the marble. No one greeted her. No one really saw her. To them, she was just the janitor. But Evelyn had a secret, one the grand pianos knew well. For 11 years, she had worked in this hallowed institution, sweeping, dusting, buffing the rows of Steinways with more reverence than the performers ever seemed to. Not once had she pressed a key when someone was around. She had learned to disappear, to fold herself into the background like a ghost with a mop. But late at night, or early in the morning before the lights were fully awake, her fingers sometimes hovered over the keys, remembering. Decades ago, in a smoky little jazz bar in Savannah, a 7-year-old girl sat on a wobbly stool and let her soul wander into music. Her mother worked the night shift waiting tables, and when the last patrons stumbled out and the chairs were flipped on tables, the old pianist would let her play. "You've got it, little one," he would whisper. "What you have can't be taught." Those nights were the only time she felt visible, but dreams are fragile things. When her mother fell ill, Evelyn traded piano lessons for long shifts and hospital bills. Music slipped through her fingers like sand. She never stopped loving it. Just stopped playing it. Now, in her 50s, she was known for her quiet diligence, the kind of woman who remembered which piano needed tuning before the tuner noticed. Who kept extra polished cloths for the Steinway in room 207 because it always attracted fingerprints. Who could identify any professor's playing style just from the sound bleeding through a practice room door? But talent. No one ever thought to ask, until one day, someone did, but not with kindness. "You missed a spot," a voice rang out across the empty hall. Evelyn turned slowly. Brandon Voss stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame with smug ease. A second-year student, son of a Wall Street name, and the kind of prodigy who wore arrogance like an accessory. He pointed to the already gleaming black lacquer of the Steinway. "Right there," he said, tapping it with a manicured finger. Evelyn said nothing. She simply walked over, gently wiped the imaginary smudge, and nodded. Years ago, she might have snapped. Now, her silence spoke more than words. Brandon wasn't done. "You know, they say even a broken piano sounds decent in an empty room. Maybe next time you should try playing something." He laughed at his own joke and disappeared into a practice room, leaving a trail of expensive cologne and ego. Evelyn stood still, cloth in hand. The silence settled again. But something inside her stirred. Later that morning, just as the light through the stained glass windows began to warm the stage, she found herself alone in the main auditorium. The room echoed with memories, performances she had cleaned up after, rehearsals she'd overheard, applause she had never received. Her cart waited by the door. Her fingers itched. She approached the piano. Not the shiny Steinway at center stage, but the old upright, tucked off to the side, usually ignored. She sat slowly, like easing into something sacred. Her hands hovered. She let them fall. Middle C. It rang out. Soft, clean, familiar. She pressed another key, then another. Her hands began to remember her heart leading where theory once lived. And though no one was watching, the room listened. Music, long dormant, stirred like breath on glass. She didn't know the security guard was there, standing at the back, arms crossed. Caleb Monroe watched in silence, hearing something more than notes, hearing truth. And for the first time in years, Evelyn Hart wasn't just the woman who cleaned the music. She was the woman who carried it inside her, waiting for the world to hear. And the world, it was just starting to listen. Caleb didn't say anything right away. He stood there for a while, one hand resting casually on his hip, the other tucked into his jacket pocket. Evelyn noticed him only when she finished playing. She stood quickly, startled, brushing her palms against her uniform as if she'd been caught stealing. "You've got nothing to be sorry for," Caleb said, walking slowly toward the piano. "You play like you mean it, not like most of them here." His voice was steady, warm, not pitying. "Just honest." Evelyn shook her head. "I shouldn't have touched it." "I'm not allowed." Caleb gave a small laugh. "Allowed by who? You think that piano cares who's wearing the uniform?" "Because I don't." He paused, letting the silence stretch comfortably. "Play something again." "No," Evelyn said quickly. "It was nothing." "Just muscle memory. I haven't played in decades." Caleb nodded. "Still." "Whatever it was, it didn't sound like nothing to me." She moved to leave, but his next words stopped her. "You know about the Whitmore competition, right?" Of course she did. It was the highlight of the conservatory's calendar. Invitations were extended to prodigies from across the nation. Judges from Europe flew in. Donors filled the front rows. Winning the Whitmore wasn't just prestigious, it was transformative. "There's a wild card slot this year," Caleb said. "An open audition. No names, no resumes, just whoever shows up and plays. It's tomorrow morning." Evelyn stared at him. "And what does that have to do with me?" Caleb met her gaze, and for the first time in a long while, someone really looked at her. Not past her. Not through her. "You've been playing in silence for too long. Maybe it's time to let someone hear it." She scoffed softly, picking up her cleaning rag. "That world isn't for people like me." Caleb tilted his head. "What kind of people are you?" That question lingered long after he walked away. It was supposed to be another quiet morning. Evelyn Hart had arrived just past 6 a.m., like always. The Boston Conservatory's main hall stood still under the blush of early sunlight, its marble floors gleaming with the echoes of last night's recital. Most of the students were still asleep, their expensive instruments tucked safely in velvet-lined cases. Evelyn, wearing her grey custodial uniform and sneakers worn thin at the soles, moved with muscle memory, cleaning, polishing, making the grand pianos sparkle before anyone else arrived to fill them with sound. She was finishing a careful wipe-down of her favourite Steinway, an old Model D Grand, with a bass tone so warm it almost sang back to her, when she heard the voice. "You missed a spot." It was sharp, polished, the kind of voice that belonged to someone used to being heard. Evelyn looked up and saw him, Brandon Voss. Second-year performance major. Son of a hedge fund executive and the walking definition of entitlement. He stood in the doorway with his violin case slung over one shoulder, a smug grin curling at the edges of his mouth. He tapped the already spotless piano with a single manicured finger. "Right there," he said. "Little smudge." Evelyn said nothing. She simply returned her cloth to the surface and gently swept it over the spot once more, even though there wasn't a fingerprint in sight. Years ago, she might have replied, might have snapped back, or defended herself. But now, she let her silence say everything. It was louder than any retort. Brandon scoffed and walked off toward the practice rooms. His footsteps clacked over the marble in perfect rhythm with his arrogance. Evelyn exhaled slowly. She wasn't angry. Not anymore. She was used to being invisible. As the sunlight grew stronger through the stained glass above the mezzanine, Evelyn took a step back from the piano, admiring her work. 11 years of wiping fingerprints, adjusting benches, replacing water cups for picky professors. She knew these instruments better than most of the students did. She could tell which piano had a slightly flattened E key, which ones needed tuning, and which ones sang when the right hands touched them. She had never played for anyone at the conservatory. Not once, but she had played, years ago, before life got in the way. "Mrs. Hart," a gentle voice called from the lobby. It was Miss Patty, the elderly receptionist, peering over her half-moon glasses. "They're prepping for the Whitmore competition tonight," she said, her voice laced with meaning. "Best to clear out before the talent rolls in." Evelyn offered a faint smile. "Yes, ma'am." Miss Patty returned to her crossword. Evelyn didn't move, not right away. Her eyes drifted back to the piano. The bench stood empty. She looked down the hallway. No one. She wheeled her cleaning cart quietly to the side wall, stepped forward, and lowered herself onto the bench like someone sitting in church for the first time in years. Her fingers hovered above the keys, not touching, just remembering. She was 7 again, sitting on a dusty stool in a smoky jazz bar in Savannah, her mother wiping down tables while Evelyn played notes with fingers too small for the octave stretch. The pianist had been an old man with leathery hands and a voice like gravel. "You've got something, little one," he'd whisper. "Don't let this world tell you otherwise." But the world had told her otherwise. Loudly. Her mother got sick. The bills piled up. Lessons stopped. Survival stepped in, and music stepped out. Yet now, as her fingers curved gently above the ivory, Evelyn felt that old flicker stir, like a song that had never stopped playing, just gotten quieter. She let one finger fall on middle C. A clean, resonant note hummed through the hall. She closed her eyes, and then she heard another voice. This time, from behind. "Didn't know the cleaning crew gave concerts now." Evelyn flinched, startled, nearly falling off the bench. She turned sharply. Standing at the entrance to the hall was a man in a dark blue campus security uniform. He looked about 30, maybe younger, with a badge clipped to his belt and a kind face. He raised his hands in mock surrender. "Sorry," he said, smiling gently. "Didn't mean to scare you." Evelyn straightened, her cheeks burning. I wasn't playing." "Well," he replied, stepping into the room. "You were sitting at a piano. And you pressed a key. That's music in my book." She stood up quickly, smoothing her uniform. "I should go." "You don't have to," he said. She looked at him for the first time. Really looked. His name tag read Caleb Monroe. There was something unhurried about him, like he wasn't just there to enforce rules, but to notice the things others missed. He gestured toward the piano. "Play something." Evelyn shook her head. "I'm not trained." Caleb shrugged. "Your hands say different." She glanced down. Her fingers were still curled, unconsciously, over the edge of the bench, just as they had always done. "I never had real lessons," she said. "Not beyond a few months." "Doesn't mean you don't know how." She picked up her cleaning rag to deflect. "These pianos aren't for people like me." Caleb tilted his head. "What kind of people are you?" The question stopped her. Simple. Quiet. Devastating. She opened her mouth. No words came out. Only years of feeling invisible, of being just the janitor. Caleb must have sensed it. "You know," he said casually, leaning against the doorway, "the Whitmore competition has one wild card slot. Open audition. Tomorrow morning." Evelyn laughed. Sharp, dry. "Sure. I'll just walk in, dressed like this, and compete with kids who've had private tutors since they were 3. Caleb shrugged. "Why not?" She stared at him. "What's the worst that could happen?" he asked. "Humiliation," she replied. Laughter. "Proof that everything I've believed about myself for 20 years is true." "Or," he said gently, "the opposite." Evelyn didn't answer. Caleb glanced at his watch. Sign-up closes tonight. Then he walked backward toward the lobby, his voice drifting like a song she hadn't heard in years. "Would be a shame," he said, "if the best pianist in this building never got to be heard." And just like that, he was gone. Evelyn stood alone in the echo of her own silence, one hand resting on the piano's lid, one question rising like a whisper. What if I played anyway? That night, Evelyn Hart sat alone in her apartment in Dorchester. The windows were closed tight against the cold, the radiator clunked softly in the corner, and the small kitchen table in front of her was covered with unopened bills, a plastic container of leftover soup, and a single pamphlet. She had picked it up at the conservatory without thinking, shoved between her gloves and a bottle of piano polish. Gold foil letters on the front read, "The Whitmore Invitational. Discover the next great virtuoso." She ran her thumb slowly across the raised text. The cover was glossy, intimidating. Beautiful. Inside were portraits of past winners, bright-eyed young musicians in gowns and tuxedos, fingers poised above grand pianos, confidence radiating from every page. They looked like they belonged. She closed the pamphlet and stared at the cover again. She didn't. Evelyn knew how this would go. She'd walk into the audition room in her grey uniform, sneakers scuffed, hands rough from years of cleaning solutions. She didn't have a resume. No list of mentors, no competitions or conservatory degrees, just a piece of music that lived in her bones. Unwritten, unpolished, untaught. The form Caleb had given her was folded neatly beside the mail. She picked it up, looked at the empty lines. Name. Piece. Background. Training. She couldn't fill them out, and yet she hadn't thrown it away either. Instead, she stood up, moved to the window, and cracked it open just slightly. Outside, the city breathed in and out. Traffic passed. Someone yelled a name across the street. A dog barked. Somewhere far off, a train rumbled past. Evelyn closed her eyes. Her fingers tapped gently on the windowsill. 4 beats, then 5. She didn't even notice the rhythm until her hand paused. It was the same phrase she'd played that morning. The one from Savannah. The one that had lived quietly in her for years, tucked away between shifts and obligations. What if she didn't need sheet music? What if the piece didn't need polish? What if it was enough, just as it was? She sat back down. She picked up the form again. She stared at it, for a long moment. Then she put it in the drawer and walked to the piano. She didn't play right away. She just rested her hands on the keys. Let them settle. Let them remember. And slowly, gently, the music began to rise, not in a roar, but like breath. That night, she played for no one but herself. But she played. The next morning, Evelyn arrived early. Too early. She hovered just outside the main hall at the conservatory, the same hallway she had walked through for over a decade without anyone ever noticing. But this time, her footsteps felt different. They echoed differently. She wasn't cleaning, she was waiting. She wore her best version of her uniform, clean, pressed, shoes polished. Still not performance wear. Still nothing close to what the others would be wearing, but it was what she had. And for once, she wasn't going to apologize for it. As she stood behind a marble column near the registration desk, she watched the crowd gathering. Young musicians with fine instruments and custom-tailored clothes. They spoke casually about summers at Juilliard Prep, private tutoring in Paris, what pieces they were performing. Names like Beethoven, Chopin, Rachmaninoff rolled off their tongues like second languages. She didn't speak. Didn't move, until someone did. "Hey!" a voice said beside her. She turned. It was Caleb Monroe. He wore his uniform, same as yesterday, badge clipped at his belt. But he looked different, like he already knew what she had decided. "I didn't say I was auditioning," she said quickly. "Right," Caleb nodded. "Just observing." She gestured to her outfit. "I can't go in there like this." He reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded form. "I picked up a registration slip last night," he said. "Just in case." Evelyn stared at it. "You were spying on me." "I was listening," he corrected. "There's a difference." She hesitated. "I've worked security here 5 years," he said. "I've heard every kind of musician. Genius, average, delusional. But what I heard yesterday..." He paused, then said softly, "That wasn't just music. That was a voice." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. Then, from behind the desk, a woman called out. "5 minutes left to register." Caleb held out the form. "I heard you," he repeated, "even when you didn't know I was listening." Evelyn didn't move. Her heart raced. Her palms were damp. What was she doing? She looked down at the form again. She thought of all the reasons to say no. All the looks. The laughs. The certainty that no one would take her seriously. And then she remembered that voice. "What kind of people are you?" She stepped forward. The woman at the desk looked up, clearly surprised. "I'd like to audition," Evelyn said, placing the form on the table. The woman glanced at her uniform, hesitated, then gave a polite nod. "Name?" "Evelyn Hart." "Your piece?" "It's original." The woman blinked. "Most of the judges prefer classical repertoire." "It's all I have." She wrote it down. "You'll be last in the order." As Evelyn turned to sit down, she could feel eyes watching her, judging her. A few students smirked. One even whispered something under his breath. She ignored them. She sat quietly. Her hands rested in her lap. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was pretending to be someone else. She was exactly who she was. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The waiting room outside the recital hall was colder than Evelyn had expected. Maybe it was the air conditioning. Maybe it was the stairs. She sat stiffly in one of the chairs lined up along the wall, her grey uniform freshly pressed, but standing out among tailored black suits and elegant dresses like a mop in a chandelier shop. Across from her sat a contestant in a silk tie and shining shoes. He leaned back with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in his life. "What piece are you performing?" he asked, his voice coated in sugar and disdain. Evelyn hesitated. "It's an original composition." His brow lifted. "Oh," he said with mock surprise, "so you compose as well as clean." A few chuckles nearby. Evelyn didn't reply. She didn't need to. She stared straight ahead at the door to the audition hall, the same one she'd mopped every Friday night for the past 11 years. She knew its hinges. She knew the grain of the wood. She knew the sound the floor made just inside. 2 boards creaked when you stepped too close to the edge of the stage. What she didn't know was whether she belonged beyond that door. The smug contestant smirked again. "I'll let you borrow one of my scores," he said. "Maybe they'll think it's yours." Evelyn folded her hands in her lap. She had scrubbed worse things off these floors. Words couldn't stain her. "Evelyn Hart?" a voice called. She looked up. It was Lauren Reed, the competition coordinator, holding a clipboard. "You're next." Evelyn stood slowly. Her knees felt tight. Her palms were damp. Every step toward the door felt like pushing through invisible weights. When she entered the hall, it was just as she remembered. Polished wood floors, soft stage lights, and 3 judges seated behind a long table like statues carved from marble. At the center sat Dr. Margaret Ellison, a legend in classical performance. Her silver hair was pinned tight, her blazer cream-colored and immaculate. She looked at Evelyn the way a chef might look at a surprise ingredient delivered mid-service. "You'll be performing an original piece," Ellison said, reading from her notes. "Yes, ma'am," Evelyn answered softly. "And your musical training?" "I'm self-taught." A ripple moved through the small audience. One of the younger judges leaned to whisper to Ellison, who gave a single nod and a tight smile. "And you work at the conservatory?" "I do." "In what capacity?" "I clean," Evelyn said. This time, the murmur was louder, clearer. "Is this a joke?" someone whispered. "Publicity stunt," another added. Ellison raised a hand to silence the room. "Well then, Miss Hart, please proceed." Evelyn took a step forward, ready to sit at the piano in the center of the stage, but before she could reach it, Ellison held up a finger. "Actually," she said, her voice syrupy, "I wonder if that piano is appropriate." One of the judges gestured toward the corner of the stage. "That one hasn't been tuned," she said, pointing to an old upright piano. "Perfect," said Ellison. "It may be more forgiving for a unique performance." The words were dressed in politeness, but the insult was plain. Evelyn paused. The room did too. Then she turned and walked slowly to the upright. Its wood was scratched. One of the pedals squeaked. The keys were yellowed and a few were chipped, but it was a piano. It had lived. She sat down. From behind her, Ellison said, "That one hasn't been serviced in quite some time." Evelyn placed her hands gently on the keys. "This piano is fine," she replied. Ellison gave a thin smile. "As you wish." The room fell quiet. Evelyn closed her eyes. She was not in Boston, not on a stage, not wearing a janitor's uniform. She was 7 years old again, in Savannah, a smoky jazz bar after closing. Her mother humming from the corner, a pianist whispering, "Play what's inside." She began. The first note wavered. soft, almost uncertain. A few people in the back stifled laughter. The piano groaned under her fingers, but she didn't stop. Her left hand found a rhythm, deep and grounded like footsteps on a wet sidewalk. Her right explored a melody she hadn't written down, only remembered. The piano resisted, but she pushed gently, and it yielded. Her hands moved with more confidence now. The piece grew, chords layered like memories. Jazz roots twisted around gospel refrains, a hint of sorrow, a flicker of joy. Everything she had never said aloud. The room changed. The smirks disappeared. The whispers faded. Even the judges leaned forward, pens still. Evelyn played. Not to impress, to speak. Ellison's smile vanished. She leaned to whisper to the other judges again. One nodded slowly, eyes wide. The music continued, aching, alive, imperfect and undeniable. And when the final note came, Evelyn held it. Let it breathe, then released. Silence. No one moved. Then, one clap. Another, and then applause. Rolling, rising. Not polite, not pity, real. People stood. Some cried. Others stared, like they had seen something they didn't know was possible. Evelyn stayed seated, stunned. The man who had mocked her earlier said nothing now. His expression was blank. Ellison stood, composed. She stepped toward the piano, looked at Evelyn with unreadable eyes and said, Miss Hart. That was unexpected. But Evelyn didn't need her validation, because the moment had already spoken, loud and clear. Evelyn Hart stood in the hallway just outside the recital hall, her fingers still trembling from the performance. The echo of applause was still ringing somewhere deep inside her chest, but around her, the world was already moving forward. Judges were meeting. Staff were packing up. Contestants were whispering, speculating. She felt suspended in time. Not triumphant, not nervous, just still. Caleb Munro found her first. He stepped into the hallway without saying a word at first, just stood next to her as if guarding a door only she could walk through. That was... He began, then stopped. Words, for once, didn't seem to cover it. Evelyn glanced at him, her voice low. I didn't expect that. He shook his head. Neither did they. Just then, Lauren Reed stepped out of the reception room, clipboard in hand. Her professional smile faltered slightly when she saw Evelyn. The judges will be announcing the results shortly, she said. There's a short reception for all finalists. You're welcome to join. Evelyn didn't move. Caleb touched her elbow gently. You should go. Inside the reception hall, the atmosphere was entirely different. Chandeliers glowed overhead. Waiters in black vests floated through the crowd, offering hors d'oeuvres and champagne flutes. Finalists gathered in tailored black and navy, laughing and straightening lapels. It was a room built for polished people, people with resumes, agents, and letters of recommendation. And yet, as Evelyn stepped in, the room seemed to hush. A few heads turned, then more. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The girl in the janitor's uniform had arrived. Lauren cleared her throat and tapped a microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening. Before we announce this year's Whitmore finalists, the judges have requested to speak directly. From the side of the room, Dr. Margaret Ellison stepped forward. Her posture was, as always, regal, controlled. But her voice, when she began, carried something new. This year, she said, we witnessed a performance that did not follow tradition. It did not rely on pedigree or prestige or technical perfection. She paused, then turned to look directly at Evelyn. But it reminded us why we sit at this table. It reminded us that soul still has a place on this stage. The audience murmured, some in agreement, some in confusion. We usually deliberate, Ellison continued. But tonight, there was no debate. The wildcard finalist for this year's Whitmore Grand Prize is Evelyn Hart. Gasps, whispers, and then applause. Real applause. Evelyn felt her knees weaken. She gripped the edge of a chair beside her, steadying herself. People were looking, some surprised, some skeptical, but most respectful. Caleb appeared again, offering her a steady nod from across the room. He didn't clap wildly, he didn't cheer. He just looked at her with something rare and quiet and solid. Like he always believed she would get here. The next morning, everything changed. At 6:14 a.m., Evelyn's phone buzzed with a text from Miss Patty at the front desk. Honey, you might want to see the Boston Globe today. Evelyn walked to the corner store and bought a copy. There, on the arts culture front page, was a black and white still of her seated at the battered upright piano, eyes closed, mid-phrase. The headline read, From Mop to Music, Janitor Shocks Elite Music World at Whitmore Audition. By noon, the conservatory's official site had shared the article. Then NPR tweeted it. Then someone uploaded a grainy cell phone video of her performance, taken quietly from the back row. By that evening, the clip had passed 100,000 views. The comments poured in. She plays with more honesty than anyone I've ever heard. I cried. Who knew a janitor could carry so much sound? I've studied piano for 20 years. That woman reminded me why I started. Evelyn didn't have social media, but Miss Patty printed a few of the kindest ones and slipped them into her locker. You should see what they're saying about you, she smiled. And it's not about your cleaning. By Thursday, reporters began calling the conservatory. A CBS local station sent a crew. A podcast producer from New York wanted to interview her for a series on late bloomers. Someone from Juilliard emailed about a guest lecture spot. It was surreal. Overwhelming. Almost absurd. Evelyn tried to keep her life as normal as possible. She still polished the pianos, still showed up early, still walked past the same students who once ignored her, some of whom now nodded politely, unsure how to treat someone they'd never noticed before. But she wasn't angry at them. She understood. Sometimes people don't look down on you. They just don't see you at all. Until you play. Until you speak in a language they forgot how to listen to. One afternoon, she sat in the break room with Caleb, the two of them quietly sharing coffee from paper cups. They're all talking about you, he said, gesturing to his phone. I know. Does it feel real? No, she said, laughing softly. But I'm glad I didn't throw away that form. He smiled. You didn't just play music, Evelyn. You told the truth. And people felt it. She looked out the window to the sun falling across the courtyard. I used to think I had missed my chance, she said quietly. You didn't miss it, he replied. You just waited for the right one. And she knew he was right. Because for the first time in years, Evelyn Hart wasn't cleaning up someone else's story. She was writing her own. 1 week after her audition shook the walls of the Boston Conservatory, the nameplate on the staff board no longer read Custodial E. Hart. Someone had replaced it with a fresh tag, Evelyn Hart, Whitmore finalist. She stood in front of it, holding a mop bucket in one hand and her breath in the other. For years, her name had been shorthand for a role, not a person. Now, it stood alone. No title, no broom, no limitations. Students who had once walked past her without a glance now nodded. Some even offered a clumsy congratulations. Professors paused to smile. One of them, the same man who once asked her to not make noise while mopping, awkwardly said, "You played beautifully." She simply thanked him, not with bitterness, but quiet clarity. Evelyn didn't need apologies. She needed space. And finally, she had it. The conservatory hallways she used to polish in silence now echoed with her story. The girl in the janitor's uniform had become something else entirely, something they weren't sure how to categorize. A musician. A miracle? A fluke? But Evelyn didn't care what they called her anymore. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't surviving. She was living. On Tuesday morning, her inbox lit up. Subject: Invitation to guest teach, fall semester. We would be honored to have you share your musical journey with our advanced piano students. She read the message twice, then a third time. No degree, no published compositions, no conservatory education. But they still wanted her, not for what she had on paper, but for the truth she poured into each note. That same week, a video clip of her audition passed 800,000 views. Comments flooded in. She didn't just play music, she bled it. That woman told my entire life story through a piano. We need more Evelyn Harts in this world. She wasn't sure how to respond. She didn't even have a Twitter account. Caleb, as always, showed up just when the noise became too loud. He found her outside rehearsal with 2 paper cups. "Hazelnut?" he asked, holding one out. "You remembered." They sat under the ivy-covered wall at the edge of the conservatory grounds. It was quiet there. No pianos, no questions, just air. "They're all talking about you now," he said. "I know," she replied, eyes down. "You scared?" he asked, half teasing. "Terrified?" "Good," he said, grinning. "Means it matters." Evelyn nodded slowly. "They keep acting like I landed here by accident. Like I stumbled into their world by mistake." "You didn't stumble," Caleb said, voice steady. "You arrived. There's a difference." On Friday evening, Dr. Margaret Ellison invited Evelyn to a private coaching session. They met in the oldest rehearsal room in the building, a plain space with no mirrors, no spotlight, just a single upright piano with a worn bench. The kind of room no one bragged about. The kind of room Evelyn trusted. "Play something," Ellison said, arms folded. Evelyn sat and began. Slowly, uncertain, still carrying the weight of performance. Halfway through, Ellison stopped her. "Don't perform," she said. "Command." "I don't know how." "You do. You just don't trust it yet." They started again. This time, Evelyn didn't hold back. She played the way she had in Savannah back when the pianist at the jazz bar told her, "Some people play to be heard. Others play because they have something to say." When she finished, Ellison didn't clap. She simply nodded and said, "You remind me of my sister." She didn't have credentials either. But the piano followed her, not the other way around. Evelyn smiled softly. "What happened to her?" "She stopped playing," Ellison replied. "The world didn't make space for her voice." "Then I won't stop," Evelyn said. "Good," Ellison answered. Don't. That weekend, Evelyn received a letter, handwritten, thick paper, gold seal on the flap. We would be honored to have you open this year's Whitmore Finals with a special performance. She stared at the card for a long moment, not because she doubted herself, but because she realized this time the doors weren't opening for her. They were opening because of her. Not as a favor, as a recognition, she wasn't being allowed in. She was being invited back. And for Evelyn Hart, a woman who had spent a decade wiping down keys without pressing them, it wasn't just an invitation. It was a homecoming. The night of the Whitmore Invitational Finals arrived quietly. There was no red carpet, no orchestra warming up in the pit. But inside the grand concert hall, the lights dimmed, and the air carried the stillness of anticipation. Velvet curtains framed the stage. A single Steinway grand sat in the center, polished to a mirror-like sheen. Evelyn Hart stood just behind the curtain, her hands folded gently at her waist. She wore no glitter, no designer gown. Just a long, black dress, simple and elegant, and a silver bracelet that once belonged to her mother. Her work shoes had been replaced by soft flats, and her janitor's uniform was long gone, yet nothing about her felt like a performance. It felt like presence. She took a deep breath. This time, she wasn't here to prove anything. She was here to speak in the only language that ever told the truth. The announcer didn't say much. No biography. No flourish. Just, "Please welcome Evelyn Hart." And she walked, calm, steady, every step landing like punctuation in a sentence she had been waiting her whole life to finish. The audience was already standing. Not clapping yet, just watching. Some had seen the video. Others had only heard whispers. But all of them, every one, leaned forward the moment she sat at the piano. No sheet music, no accompanist, no introduction, only her. Evelyn placed her fingers on the keys and waited. The room hushed further, an impossible silence. Then, with the gentlest pressure, she began. The piece was new, but it carried old echoes. It began with a melody soft as memory, fragile, like a breath in winter. A theme threaded with years of quiet, the weight of missed chances, and the small beauty of survival. The notes curled through the air like steam rising from a late-night cup of coffee. It wasn't showy, it was honest. Then it grew. The rhythm deepened. Minor chords gave way to syncopated jazz phrases. Gospel runs rose like prayers beneath the classical structure. There were no walls in her music, just bridges. Bridges between where she'd been and where she was now. She wasn't just playing a song, she was testifying. Every movement of her hands spoke, "I have lived. I have been silent. I have been overlooked. And I have not disappeared." At the midpoint, Evelyn did something unexpected. She closed her eyes, lifted her hands, and began to improvise. A ripple ran through the judges' row. Improvisation at the Whitmore Finals. Unthinkable, but Evelyn didn't flinch. She leaned into the moment and made it hers. Her left hand built a heartbeat. Her right hand danced like memory. It wasn't about technique anymore. It was about trust. Trusting that whatever came out of her was enough. And it was. The audience didn't move. Not a cough. Not a stir. Only wide eyes, wet lashes, open hearts. And when the final note fell, A high C sharp held just long enough to say thank you. The room remained still for 5 seconds. Then 10. Then applause. Not polite, not expected, but explosive. They stood. They wept. They clapped as if trying to return to her all the sound she had once been denied. Evelyn bowed, not out of performance, but out of gratitude. Not for the applause, but for the chance. Later that evening, Evelyn stood in the green room holding a paper cup of tea. Her hands were steady now, her face still flushed with warmth. Caleb entered, silent and smiling. "You do realize," he said, "you just rewrote the ending of this entire competition." Evelyn smirked. "Good." From down the hall, Dr. Margaret Ellison approached. Her heels clicked less sharply than usual. Her blazer was still immaculate, but her gaze was softer now. She paused beside Evelyn. "You broke the rules," she said quietly. Evelyn looked at her. "I know." Ellison nodded slowly. "Thank God." Then she extended her hand. This time, Evelyn took it without hesitation. Musician to musician. Not judge to janitor. The next morning, Evelyn's story was everywhere. CBS, NPR, the Boston Globe, even a segment on Good Morning America. But Evelyn stayed grounded. She returned to her apartment in Dorchester. She didn't go shopping. Didn't book a manager. She made herself toast and opened the window to let the morning air in. She sat at her second-hand upright piano, the one with the sticky G key. And she played, not for the press, not for the stage, but for herself, for the girl who once dreamed quietly in the corner of a smoky jazz bar, for the woman who had cleaned those keys 1,000 times before touching them, for the silence that had taught her how to listen. Months later, Evelyn began her guest lectures at the conservatory. Her first class had 37 students. Most didn't ask about scales. They asked, "How do you play like that?" And Evelyn answered every time, "Don't play to impress, play to tell the truth." That became her motto. Not technique over emotion, but truth over perfection. Every seat in every class filled. Not because she was famous, but because she was real, because she was them. Because somewhere in every room was another Evelyn Hart, just waiting for someone to say, "You don't need permission. You just need to begin." Evelyn Hart's journey reminds us of something too easily forgotten in a fast, filtered, and noisy world. Sometimes the most powerful voices come from the quietest corners. For over a decade, she was invisible, sweeping floors, polishing pianos, and walking halls where her name was never spoken. Not because she wasn't worthy, but because the world had decided who she was before she ever had a chance to show otherwise. And yet, when her moment came, not dressed in prestige, not backed by credentials, she sat down at a worn, forgotten piano and told the truth through music. And the world stopped to listen. Her story isn't just about talent, it's about timing. About not giving up when life forces you into the background. It's about the quiet resilience so many people, especially older Americans, carry every day. Those who've worked behind the scenes, who've raised families, made sacrifices, buried dreams, and assumed their chance had passed. But Evelyn proves it's never too late, not to try, not to be seen, not to be heard. We live in a culture that often worships the young and fast. But wisdom, depth, soul, those don't come early. They come from experience, from scars, from late-night doubts and early morning efforts no one ever saw. Evelyn's story is for every person who was ever underestimated. It's for the grandmothers who danced alone in the kitchen when no one was watching. It's for the veterans who never spoke of what they carried home. It's for the men and women who gave everything to others and left their own dreams in the margins. This story says, you are not forgotten. You are not finished, and the world still needs your sound. So whether you're 55 or 75, whether you've played your life like a symphony or just held one note for as long as you could, let Evelyn remind you, the stage may still be waiting. And when you walk onto it, don't apologize. Sit down, lift your hands, and play what's inside.